Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, I think we're ready to start. Thank you all for coming. This is a talk on the first and second golden ages of Islamic inventions. There was a first age of a golden age of Islamic inventions, and what happened then was futuristic inventions that are invented nowadays are also based on the foundations that were laid down by the Muslims in the first place. So as we go along, we will talk about futuristic inventions as well. Some of you may know me as the Muslim chaplain here, but I have got a lot of hats within the community. I am actually a qualified teacher, and I started off my life as a scientist, so I have got a biotechnology degree, which nowadays is an equivalent to biomedical sciences. And I used to work in Moorfields Eye Hospital in the laboratories as a scientist. So this talk is right up my street really, because it's all about science, and I love science, and I love history, and I love history, science and religion, and this talk is an amalgamation of all three. Why I'm doing this talk is we had Science Week last week, and the university asked me to do a talk for that, because they know I've got a scientific background. And then this week we've got Global Week at the university, and I was asked again to do something for that. And on top of that, we've got a new forming Islamic society here, which is going to be led by medic students. So I thought, if I do this talk, this will amalgamate all three, the science and the Global Week, and it would really benefit the medical students as well. Okay, so just before we start, we could put our mobiles on silent. This is being recorded, and I will send a link out afterwards. And we will start off with a PowerPoint. So if you can keep the questions in your head, okay, but I will be interacting with you as we go along. And then we will have questions at the end. We will finish off with refreshments outside, because we're not allowed to eat in here, which is why the refreshments are at the end outside. And we do have some booklets as well on some of the stuff that I will be talking about as well at the end, that you can pick up on your way out. On your way out, if you could please register as well and just write your name there, so that we can monitor how many people came to these events. The more people that come, the more the university are happy for me to hold more in the future. Okay, so let us make a start. The Golden Age of Islam is a period of time in history when Muslims flourished in lands and invented many inventions which benefited the whole world. So does anybody know why the Golden Age of Islam actually came about? What was there in our religion, in Islam, that actually made the Golden Age of Islam come about? Any ideas? Put your hand up if you know. Yes?
Well, there was within the Quran it says to question and seek knowledge.
Brilliant. Well done. So the Quran, the very first word of the Quran is read. And that's for everybody, for male and female. And it told you to go out and look for knowledge. It actually makes you reflect in there, the way the Quran is written. It actually goes into science and things like that. And that makes you look into things. And also, we have got so many quotes from the Prophet. Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, said the seeking of knowledge is obligatory for every Muslim, male and female. Whoever treads a path seeking knowledge, God will make easy for him the path to paradise. So there were so many indications to go out there and seek knowledge. So I've got a video now which will summarize that.
Did you know a man who couldn't read and write was voted the most influential person in history ever? Crazy, right? But absolutely true. That man was the Prophet Muhammad, who through the Quran was able to take a group of ancient tribal Arabs who were farmers and goat and camel herders and inspire them to greatness where they changed the world, and now 1.8 billion people today follow their example. But what was the key to this massive transformation? How did they make so much impact and so quickly? It was down to one key word: knowledge. No other religion stresses as much on seeking knowledge as Islam. But what does this mean? Why does it stress on it so much? The Muslim attitude towards knowledge made it the greatest civilization in the world and has shaped the world as we know it today. It is said in Islam, to seek knowledge is compulsory on every believer. Given this obligation to seek beneficial knowledge, this is how the early Muslim scientists, architects and engineers saw their own work. They sought and implemented knowledge as a means of worshipping Allah. They recognized that the more that they learned about the world, the better they would understand and impact their deen, and vice versa. It was this unquenchable thirst for knowledge that led to world exploration, advances in science, art and technology, and free, empowered communities. The Quran is the ultimate book of knowledge for us until the end of time, and is devoted to intellect, knowledge, learning, logic, and to think. The first verses of the Quran to be revealed began with the word Iqra, read. The Quran mentions the word knowledge in various forms 854 times, and that many times human beings are asked to think, consider, and to reason. Allah has said in the Quran that He has sent down the book so that it may explain to us all things, that is, all things throughout history until the end of time. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, emphasized the importance of acquiring knowledge in many different ways. He looked at knowledge over time, seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. He looked at knowledge by location, seek knowledge even if it is as far as China. He did not differentiate by gender or by age. Seeking of knowledge is a duty of every Muslim. He also didn't differentiate by faith. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer, and you should take it even if you find it in the mouth of a non-Muslim. The Prophet Adam was taught the names of all things, and it was this knowledge which distinguished him from the angels. Humanity has inherited from Adam the ability to acquire knowledge. We are able to learn about the world around us and the things that it contains. We have the power of language and the ability to reason. Many of the greatest scientific thinkers in Islam were religious scholars, which suggests that they would learn the sciences in conjunction with learning and understanding their religion. What made them great was their approach to knowledge, which allowed them to excel. As you can see, Islam heavily stresses on the importance of gaining knowledge, which led them on to amazing achievements in science, trade, engineering and exploration. Great Islamic thinkers demonstrated how faith and philosophy, religion and science, revelation and reason didn't just merely coexist, but thrive together in harmony, and it was this deep attitude toward knowledge that elevated them to great things.
Okay, so this is actually our map of when the Islamic Empire actually grew around the whole world. So Muawiyah was the first caliph of the Umayyad dynasty. During the rule of the Umayyads, the empire grew to its greatest size. And that actually happened in the last part. So if we look at the map, the red parts is where Islam actually started in Arabia. And when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passed away, Islam was only really in the red regions only. And then it was actually in 661 that the Islamic Caliphate then grew to the rest of Arabia. And it was all called Arabia in those days. The country names came later, and that's the orange parts. And then if you look at the yellow part, that is what we're talking about when it comes to Muawiyah. So it was in his time that the empire grew to its greatest size, stretching across from North Africa and the Middle East to Pakistan and in Europe, most of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. So this is the map that shows the growth of the Islamic Empire from the death of Muhammad, peace be upon him, to its largest size. And that is actually every single thing that I quote in this lecture today is referenced And a lot of the information is actually from the Science Museum itself. So if it's out there nationally, then it must be correct. But I've also got books here, so we have got a book there called 1001 Inventions. So there are over 1001 inventions in that book, all referenced, which you can have a look at later, and there's another book next to it as well. I will read out the references as we go along. So we know that the Quran was the very first, most important thing in Islam, because we believe that that is the word of God. And people will try and write it really, really beautifully, in beautiful calligraphy. And as you can see, the letters of that Quran are very curvy, and there's sort of thin and fat parts to that Quran. So what do you think might have been invented as a result of having to write the Quran, word by word? Any ideas? Who said that? Pen. Good, well done. So, it was actually, the pen was invented. In 953, the Sultan of Egypt demanded a writing tool which would not leak ink or stain his clothes. The fountain pen was devised. This had a reservoir which held the ink, and gravity and capillary action moved to the writing tip, enabling it to write. And that's actually referenced from the Science Museum. So the calligraphy pen was invented by Muslims.
Luckily, the fountain pen was invented for the Sultan of Egypt in 953, after he demanded a pen which would not stain his hands or clothes.
After a while, it got really tedious writing hundreds and hundreds of Qurans by hand. Can you imagine how many Qurans? Because it has to be word for word exactly the same. They had to be handwritten, and it would take a long time. So what do you think next might have been invented? The next thing? The print. Good, printing. So printing, the printing press was founded by Muslims as a result of printing the Quran. Instead of writing it hundreds and hundreds of times, they can print it. It's much easier. So in 1454, Gutenberg developed the most sophisticated printing press of the Middle Ages. However, movable brass types were in use in Islamic Spain 100 years prior, and that's where the world's first printing devices were made. And this is actually a picture of the very first printing device, and that's again taken from the Science Museum. Okay, as knowledge spread, then we needed somewhere where everybody can go to learn knowledge. So what do you think might have been invented next? Schools, not even schools, right at the top. What are we in now? University. Okay, so basically with Islam, it started right at the top, and then it went downwards. So it was actually a lady, Fatima al-Fihriya, under the Khalifa, that built the very first university during 841 CE in Morocco. And she actually herself taught science along with other various subjects in that university. That was 841 under Islamic rule. And the Muslims were the first to establish universities. Even the concept of the position of the chair of the university comes from where the university lecturer would sit on a chair and all the students would sit around like you all are now. Okay? So even that comes actually from Muslims. And that university is actually still there now, and I've actually seen it. Is there anybody who's seen it? You've seen it, yes? I can see you getting happy. It's beautiful. The world's oldest university is the University of Al-Qarabiyin in Fez, and is still there today. And it's actually, a lot of people go there to study Islam. Now here are some more facts about Fatima. first university, but later on universities started popping up everywhere. So Baghdad was actually, did you know, the capital of the Islamic Empire, and it was actually, it was there that a very important university was made. The House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, founded by Caliph Harun al-Rashid. It was a library. So library, we've got some librarians here, okay, so library was actually invented by Muslims. Library research facility which collected and translated scientific writing from many languages. By 860 AD, it held the largest collection of books in the world, and that is really where the Golden Age actually started. It was there, people from all around the world would go there and they would learn from the big scholars about science and lots of other subjects. Liaison with the traders inspired the Christians to learn about the House of Wisdom. So if you look at that map I showed you earlier, and we showed the yellow parts, that is when the Golden Age of Islam started coming into Britain through the borders. And it was from there that all the books came into England while the trading was all going on. So Muslim scholarship, especially early Islamic philosophy and Islamic science, was well known through Latin translation among the learned in England, which led to the founding of Arabic chairs at Oxford and Cambridge University. So Oxford and Cambridge universities came from the idea of this university there. And did you know that Arabic was actually taught in Oxford and Cambridge University? And a large collection of Arabic manuscripts were acquired, and they were collected in places such as the Bodleian Library at Oxford. These Arabic manuscripts were sought after by natural philosophers for their research in subjects such as observational astronomy, maths, science, religion and medicine, to topography and garden plants. Roger Bacon was one of the Englishmen who studied these books in Oxford University and is known to have studied the works of several early Muslim philosophers. You must have all heard of Roger Bacon, but we will be actually referring to him in a minute. So how did the spread of Islam affect the world? It affected the world in a really big way. People migrated from all over the world to study in the Muslim universities. And as millions of people embraced Islam, they brought with them the heritage of ancient civilizations like Egypt, Greece, India, Persia and Rome. And this is actually a real-life painting of some scholars at an Abbasid library from the Maqamat of Al-Hariri, Baghdad. And that is actually, that painting is from 1237, that's when it was painted. So the House of Wisdom in Baghdad was very, very important. The first libraries were established in the universities, and because universities were formed, that's when all the system underneath had to be formed, like schools, okay, secondary schools and other schools. Because we started right at the top, then we had to go down to lower bits. Now those libraries, I did mention about the second golden age of Islam. Did you know that some of those Islamic libraries are now opening up around the world again? So people are collecting all the old books and they're opening up Islamic libraries. This is the latest advert going out at the moment. One of the largest mosques in England is the East London Mosque, and they're actually opening up a free Islamic library where they're collecting as much information as they can and reopening these libraries, which is really, really good. The other thing in a university, which happens even nowadays, is the graduation robe. So did you know that the first university in Europe was established by Muslims in the year 841 in the city of Salerno in Italy, and it was an extension of the Muslim universities in the east. Then the universities in Toledo, Seville and Granada were opened. So when the students from Europe, the non-Muslims, learned and graduated from these universities and returned to their lands, they used to dress in the Arab Muslim robes. They imitated the dress of the Muslims, and that would become an indication that this particular young man graduated from the University of the Muslims. So this imitation of the wearing of this Arab dress has stayed actually even now. This is actually documented in a book. Jack Goody, in his book titled Islam in Europe, says that Arabic clothing has remained as the purest and clearest sign of scholastic integrity up to this day of ours, especially during scholastic events such as the debating of university theses and graduation. So that graduation robe on the right is actually equivalent to the original graduation robes, which is still actually happening nowadays. Some of you are really shocked there, aren't you? Some of your faces. Okay.
Actually, the Sultan used to wear something like this.
Yes, they did.
So that the exact one of the graduation.
Yes, big and black and
Sultans,
heavy.
yeah.
That's right, yes. So did you know there were two types of inventions? This part is very, very important. The first type of inventions were as a direct result of the requirements of the religion. So those were the first lot of inventions that happened. And then the second lot of inventions that happened was because of the science that is in the Quran. The science in the Quran led to people to investigate what science was written there and to experiment, and that led to inventions. So first we will deal with the ones as a direct result of the religion, and then we will go on to other ones. So Islamic scholars built upon ancient heritage with their own scientific advances, and Muslims excelled in art, architecture, astronomy, maths, geography, science and history. So who can tell me what the most important thing was in Islam where inventions needed to take place? What is one of our pillars? After the first pillar, which is believing in God, what's the second pillar? Anybody? What's the second pillar of Islam? Come on, everyone.
Prayer.
Prayer, good. You lead everybody. Enthusiasm, because she's really good with enthusiasm. That will get everyone going. Okay, so prayer, did you know, was the second pillar of Islam, and inventions were needed because nobody knew, for example, that the afternoon prayer, Asr prayer, nobody knew when it was. If you look at morning, you know when morning is, when the sun comes up. Lunchtime, yes, you know, it's the warmest part of the day. Evening, yes, you know, because it starts to get dark. Night, yes, we know when it's night, yes? But the Asr prayer right in the middle was a big problem. Nobody knew when that was. Okay, so here is a short video on explaining how the invention came about because of the prayer right in the middle.
The Quran says, guard the obligatory prayers, and in particular, the Asr prayer. According to historian David A. King, the Asr prayer became the focal point of the development of mathematical geography and astronomy in the Muslim world.
Okay, so what do you think was one of the first inventions that was invented to find out when prayer is?
The compass?
Pardon?
Compass?
No. When prayer is, the time. The clock. What do we look at? How do we know when it's time to pray? The clock, okay? So Muslims invented the clock. Ibn Yunus al-Masri discovered the pendulum in the 10th century. He was the first to study and document its oscillatory motion. Its use in clocks was introduced by Muslim physicists during the 15th century. So this is al-Jazari, and he was a 13th century engineer and inventor. He created the fabled elephant clock and invented groundbreaking machines, changing the way we harness technology today. And did you know that there used to be in those days a giant clock that would be put in the middle of the town, a bit like Big Ben, and everybody would look at that clock. Then later on, clocks began cropping up into houses as people became richer, and then watches came at the end. Okay, so that is actually a real-life painting of the elephant clock. And remember that when it was revealed to pray 5 times a day, an instrument was needed to know exact time of prayers, so they had to invent the clock. This is why it annoys me when Muslims go late everywhere, because it's actually Muslims that invented clocks, so we need to remember that actually. Okay, and so many other things was invented. Also, cogs and internal mechanism of a clock was invented. And did you know that there was no water in Arabia, and because of that, machinery also needed to be invented to extract water from the ground, right from deep down in the ground. So in 1206, did you know that the same person, he published a book called Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices. In it, he described over 50 inventions, including a combination lock, mechanical clocks powered by water and weights, valves and pistons, crankshaft, key mechanism in nearly all inventions, which turns rotary motion into linear and can be used for internal combustion engines and to raise water to irrigate crops. Remember, there was no water and it was deep in the ground and it needed to be extracted out.
One of the most important mechanical inventions in the history of humankind is the crankshaft, which is used in most machinery today. And it was created by an ingenious Muslim engineer called Al-Jazari to raise water for irrigation. His 1206 book of knowledge of ingenious mechanical devices shows that he also invented the use of valves and pistons and was considered the father of robotics. Amongst his 50 other inventions was the combination lock. His legacy and importance in the history of engineering is unrivaled. Until modern times, there was no other document from any cultural area that provided a comparable wealth of instructions for the design, manufacture, and assembly of machines. The impact of all his inventions can be seen and felt in all of the later designing of steam engines and internal combustion engines, paving the way for automatic control and other modern machinery. Three brothers, known as the Banu Musa brothers, were celebrated mathematicians and engineers in 9th century Baghdad. Their book of ingenious devices, published in 850, was a large illustrated work on mechanical devices that included automata, today used in artificial intelligence to make machines more intelligent, puzzles, as well as what we would today refer to as executive toys.
And then knowledge transmitted to Europe through Latin translations of Islamic books on mechanics. These clocks were weight-driven. Designs and illustrations of epicyclic and segmental gears were provided. One such clock included a mercury escapement. This was directly copied by Europeans during the 15th century. During the 9th century, Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain, he is going to come up a lot. According to Will Durant, invented a watch-like device which kept accurate time. And Muslims constructed a variety of highly accurate astronomical clocks for use in their observatories. And that reference is from the Science Museum and 1001 Inventions. So we look at the clock, we know it's time to pray. What's next? It's time to pray, and then what? What do we do? Even before that, what do you do even before that? Yes, washing. You go and you wash, don't you? So, there had to be, water was very, very scarce in the land in which Islam came. Arabia had no water. So collection mechanisms were put into place to store water in one area where people could go and they could wash themselves. So did you know that water really fascinated Muslims because there was no water? You know, you get fascinated with things where there is none of that. So basically, fountains also was put as decorations outside kings' houses because it was a decoration. Water was a decoration and fountains came out there. They also had the technology to pour the water out as well, to make it a fountain. And also the collection of water. And washing was very important, so hydropower was actually invented, and a dam was invented in order to collect the water all in one place, because water was so scarce. It's actually from hydropower that electricity then came afterwards, so that's the second golden age which happened, but it originated as hydropower. Right, so you go over, you start washing yourself. What do you need now? I'm giving you lots of clues here. What else might Muslims have invented? Toothbrush. Okay, so we're washing ourselves now, and this was actually the very first toothbrush which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, actually used, and he used a tree branch called miswak, and that tree branch is absolutely amazing because did you know that all the chemicals of toothpaste are in there as well? So it's a 2-in-1 toothbrush plus toothpaste as well. So it has been proven that siwak is effective in stopping the growth of bacteria in the mouth due to its chemical composition. Vitamin C and it is really rife in there, and cytosterol strengthen the capillaries that nourish the gums. It contains a resinous substance that strengthens the gums. It contains chloride and silica, which is known to increase the whiteness of the teeth. In fact, this little herbal stick guarantees complete oral health. So that is basically toothpaste and toothbrush all in one. And did you know that the ingredients of that miswak is actually used in toothpaste nowadays? So Colgate came much later. Okay, what else? When you're washing yourself, what else are we using on our bodies? I think you said it. Soap. Someone said soap. Yes. So soap. Did you know that soap is alkali? And alkali is an Arabic word, al-kali. Al-kali. Okay? Ancient Egyptians and Romans had a form of pomade from which Muslim Arabs perfected a recipe for soap, creating a vegetable oil and sodium hydroxide base to which fragrant fine oil was added. And remember that in Islam it's required to wash 5 times a day, so cleanliness was very, very important, and cleaning compounds had to be made, basically, to clean themselves. And it was actually somebody called Muhammad who brought the very first soap into Britain. And this is actually a real-life painting. It was only in 1810, did you know, that shampoo was introduced to England. So from soap came shampoo, washing powder, washing up liquid, those kinds of things. And it was introduced by a Muslim entrepreneur who opened Muhammad's Indian vapor baths at the beach in Brighton. And that reference is from the Travels of Deen, Muhammad and Shampoo. And basically this is actually a painting of these baths, and all the Victorians, the very rich people, would go there and they would have a nice bath and have a medicated shampoo there. He was a very, very rich businessman. He was very smart, and did you know he also opened the very first Indian restaurant in England? So did you know that a large group of Muslims in Britain arrived in 1760? There were sailors recruited in India from Bengal to work for the British East India Company. Ship's cooks came too, many of them from Sylhet in Bangladesh, and he actually called himself Sheikh Deen Muhammad, so he made his name sound English because there was a lot of racism in those days. So obviously it was Sheikh Deen Muhammad, but he changed it to Sheikh Deen Muhammad. He was the captain of the British East India Company in 1810, and he founded London's first Indian restaurant. And the way he named it, he called it Hindustani Coffee House. And that is actually a reference from the Morning Post. Do you want to know what he looks like? There he is, looking very British there. And there he is. This is a portrait from the Royal Pavilion and Museums, Brighton and Home. So he was the first person to open up an Indian restaurant. I thought I'll throw one in there while we're talking about, because he brought soap to England. Okay? Right, we are now, we've washed ourselves ready for prayer. Now what? What usually happens up in the mosque, and then you know it's time to go in and start praying? The adhan. Okay, so the adhan is the call to prayer. And the call to prayer in those days, there was no electricity. No electricity at all. And the call to prayer had to go out loud so everybody could hear it. So did you know that architectural structures were made in such a way to so that the call to prayer could echo around the whole mosque. And this is where we get the dome shape from. The dome of the mosque is put there for a reason, so that people know that it's time to pray. The Islamic world's dome and castle building techniques were introduced to European buildings, including parapets, round towers, battlements, and arrow slits. Henry V actually enlisted a Muslim to build his castle. So there were architects coming here from Islamic lands to help build castles and things here in the same kind of style. I don't know if anybody has seen, there's a really nice mosque-type building in Brighton, the Brighton Pavilion, and it looks just like a mosque. And that is some of the influences of Islam in Britain, still there today. So a minaret as well, from where the call to prayer came, and then the dome was used to echo around the whole mosque. Right, what's next? You hear the call to prayer, where are you going to go now? Into the mosque. What do you see in the mosque, which Muslims invented? There's three answers here. The carpet, good, that is one of them. Anything else? Okay, what about the pillars, the architecture? Okay, did you know that Islamic architectural methods were included? Okay, ribbed vaulting, and the Roman and Norman buildings used round arches. These were adapted with pointed arches used in the Islamic world and were able to bear more weight and hence stronger. These can even be seen nowadays in Gothic cathedrals across Europe. So these pointed arches were actually introduced and actually held up the roof stronger. They were stronger than the other stuff. So they were invented by Muslims.
The pointed arches, so characteristic of Europe's Gothic cathedrals, was another invention borrowed from Islamic architecture. It was much stronger than the rounded arch used by the Romans and Normans, and allowed the building of bigger, higher, more complex and grander buildings. Other borrowings from Muslim genius included ribbed vaulting, rose windows and dome building techniques. Europe's castles were also adapted to copy the Islamic world with arrow slits, battlements, a barbican and parapets. Square towers gave way to more easily defended round ones. In fact, Henry V's castle architect was a Muslim.
And then when you go in the mosque, there is no idols or any pictures of any gods or prophets. The reason is that Islam came to get rid of idol worship. So when you go in a mosque, the mosques had to be beautifully decorated to still look appealing, but without any pictures. So did you know that there were actually, during the Umayyad dynasty, there were three types of artistic styles which were clearly defined as Islamic that developed. And here are three forms of Islamic art. So we've got geometric, vegetal, which is flowery, and calligraphy, beautiful calligraphy. They've already got the pens, haven't they, to do their beautiful calligraphy with. And I have got some bits here, which you can all have a look at afterwards. This is a Quran rack, but if you look at that Quran rack, it has got a vegetal pattern on it, okay? And if you look at this one, that's my mat about to fall on the floor. And if we look at this one, this is definitely geometric. Okay, so there's a geometric style on there, which you would find in a mosque as well. And there is also lots of calligraphy, and I've got lots of calligraphy here, so you'll get a lot of this kind of stuff in mosques. I don't know if anybody here has been inside a mosque. And also, the same kind of thing is replicated on our Quran, so we wouldn't have any pictures of any prophets, messengers or gods. So if you look on there, there's beautiful patterns on there, and you can even look inside, and there are so many beautiful patterns in there. Okay? Now, blue is a very important stone because it is prominent in the Muslim lands. So it's called feroza in Arabic, but the turquoise stone is very, very apparent. So a lot of mosques, for example, the blue mosque when you go to Turkey, is and in Iraq there's lots of mosques that are blue, and in Iran as well. So blue is actually a common colour because that's a very precious stone that you can get in those Islamic countries. Okay, anything else in a mosque that you think Muslims may have invented? You're in the mosque and you're looking around. You've noticed the pillars, you've noticed the architecture. What else? Anybody? Any ideas? Do you want to just have a guess? Windows? Who invented glass? What is glass made out of, first of all? Sand. Where does sand come from? The most amount of sand is in Arabia, isn't it? Yeah, in the deserts. So sand was used to make glass, and here is the very first stained glass windows. The most colourful compounds are in Islamic countries, warm countries. If you look at the mountains, they're all coloured, they're striped, and from there they would take the compounds out of the mountains. They've got oil, the Arab countries had oil, they'd mix it with oil and they would paint, and the glass was made out of sand. So the first windows, stained glass windows, were actually made by Muslims. Carpets we have mentioned already. Now basically there was all sand on the floor, so Islamic countries then had to make something that they can put on the sand on which they can pray. And prayer mats, started off with prayer mats, we've got a prayer mat here, and then later on carpets were introduced as well, and we all know that that actually all came from Turkey. Okay?
Carpets were regarded as part of paradise by medieval Muslims, thanks to their advanced weaving techniques, new tints from Islamic chemistry, and highly developed sense of geometrical pattern, which were the basis of Islam's art.
Right, we're ready to pray now. We've gone in the mosque, we've looked at all the architecture, we've got our prayer mat out. What's next? Yeah, we need to know which way to face, and this was a big problem, okay? We were told to face towards Mecca in Arabia, but how do people know when Islam spread to Spain and to China and to India? How do they know where to face? They haven't got a clue, have they? Unless you're living in Arabia, you don't know where to face. So the scientists looked at the knowledge in the Quran to work out where to face. So basically in the Quran it told you about so much. It told you about the sun and the moon, they move by precise calculation. That's in the Quran chapter 55 verse 5. And all of this knowledge was used to calculate directions. It also told us that it is not permitted to the sun to catch up with the moon, nor can the night outstrip the day. Each just swims along in its own orbit according to law. So it actually told you about the laws, and it told you about the elliptical patterns as well. And it also said it is he who created night and day, the sun and the moon, each floating in its orbit. So basically, it is all of this kind of stuff that then led to an invention of which way to face. It mentioned also that the Earth and other planets take their own courses, and orbital patterns of the cosmos were also described. In 1512, Nicholas Copernicus put forward his theory that the sun is stationary at the centre of the solar system and the planets revolve around it. The belief the sun is stationary was widespread until 20th century, when it was found that it is not stationary and moving in an orbit around the centre of our Milky Way galaxy. And this was actually mentioned already in the Quran 1400 years ago. So Muslim astronomers improved Ptolemy's findings in the 9th century, disputing his archaic ideas. They had proved the sun was at the centre of the solar system and the orbits of planets were elliptical. They produced accurate astronomical tables and star charts, and the Alphonsine tables were copies of works on astronomy transmitted to Europe via Islamic Spain, and Toledo tables is a classic example there. And here now is some evidence on how Ptolemy's work was actually corrected.
In the 16th century, the belief was that everything revolved around the stationary Earth. Copernicus could have never been able to formulate his model without the book on planetary motion by Ptolemy, or more precisely, the Latin translation of the Muslim astronomer Ibn Shatir's commentary and correction of Ptolemy. This point was proven by Austrian mathematician and historian of science Otto Neubauer in 1957. That the lunar model that Copernicus used in his groundbreaking book, De Revolutionibus, that started the scientific revolution, was exactly the same as Muslim astronomer Ibn Shatir and Nasr ad-Din Tusi's planetary models, written some 200 years back. Add to this the discovery of German scientist and polymath Willi Hartner in 1975 that even the diagrams are same detail by detail, down to their alphabetical designations, where Tusi uses Aleph, Copernicus uses A, where Tusi uses Ba, Copernicus uses B, and so on.
Okay, very interesting. And Al-Battani was actually a very important person. You will hear about him later on as well. Did you know that a lot of the scientists, it wasn't just one thing they invented, they actually were very, very well learned in so many different subjects. So when they used to go to the universities, they would take on board a number of different subjects. So Al-Battani actually wasn't just into all of this. He will come up later on as well when we look at other inventions. So because of the information in the Quran, people really got interested in observing stars, and they were very easy to see in Arabia. There's no clouds in Arabia, it doesn't rain, okay? So it's clear skies. In the whole, in the Middle East, it doesn't rain and there's a lack of water. And you can lie down in the warm country on the floor in the desert, and you look up and you can see all the stars crystal clear, which you can't see in Britain, can we, with all the clouds and stuff. So basically, it was all this information. And this astronomer, he was from Turkey, but he worked in Syria. He corrected Ptolemy's work, and Copernicus used his works and compiled new tables of the sun and moon. And it was actually an astrolabe, which is a very, very clever instrument, was actually invented. And this was invented because in the Quran it said pray 5 times a day. An instrument was needed to know, first of all, the exact times of prayers, and astrolabes were used to find times of sunrise, the rising of fixed stars to help schedule morning prayers, and it was an all-in-one aid to navigation and a way of finding the Qibla, which is the direction of prayer. This was first done by using an astrolabe, which is a type of telescope used to study the patterns of the stars, and it determines the rhythm of the whole day. So developed by Muslim astronomers, 8th century mathematician Muhammad al-Khazari by introducing angular scales and adding circles indicating azimuths on the horizon. 10th century Abdul Rahman al-Sufi described 1,000 uses of astrolabes, including astronomy, astrology, horoscopes, navigation, surveying, timekeeping, prayer times, and direction. And he introduced to Europe in 1100 and became the most popular astronomical instrument by 1650. And if you look at this prayer mat, which was also invented by Muslims, it does actually have the call to prayer, the direction of prayer on there. It's got the compass on there. And what's interesting is a lot of people don't know this, but you know we've got apps on our phones nowadays, the accessories, which tell us which way to face. That was actually specially put on the mobile phone for Muslims. Because who else would want a compass on there? What would you need a compass for? It was actually especially included on iPhones for Muslims so that they can know which way to face. Okay? And did you know that later on, all these tables and things that were made, much, much later on when satellite systems came into play, only in the 1960s, less than 100 years ago. In modern times, the navigation systems and satellites, they showed the courses of Earth and other planets, and they found that all these theories were 100% correct. And there were just so many things written in the books that were all correct, which is absolutely amazing, considering that Muslims couldn't have gone up there. You know, satellites didn't get invented till later. So here is a video which I'm going to put on now, which talks to us about lots of other things that were determined by the use of astronomy. Astronomy was really right. Okay, in that video you saw also that the second golden age, which we're talking about as well, nowadays what is happening is people are mimicking all of this, going back in time, and observatories are coming out. You know, there's always this problem about when it's Eid. Nobody knows when Eid is because of the moon, and there's all this, you're laughing because you know it, all different countries are saying it's Eid this day and it's Eid this day. The latest is that observatories are now actually being made so that people can, you know, with the technology of nowadays, see when the moon actually does begin. It's with all the astronomy really that the Islamic calendar also was actually made as well, because they mentioned calendars in there. So basically in the Quran it mentioned for the first time that the moon was mentioned to be lit up by reflection from the sun. Everyone previous to the Quran thought that the moon was also a light, but in the Quran it actually explained that the sun lights up the moon. So it says in the Quran, "Blessed is he who is placed in the sky great stars and placed therein a burning lamp and luminous moon. It is he who made the sun to be a shining glory and the moon to be a reflected light of beauty." And did you know that it's with all of that knowledge that eclipses were looked at? So you know when you look at the way the moon fades and grows again and that kind of stuff. So eclipse of the moon, when it passes into the Earth's shadow, it appeared in the works of the astronomer Al-Biruni in 973 to 1048 CE. Now, did you know that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, told us about eclipses? He told us, for example, to pray. There's a special prayer when there's an eclipse. So the people of Arabia did know what an eclipse was, but that actually instigated them to look into eclipses further. And with the knowledge of the sun and the moon and the way the sun shines on the moon, it made them look into that even more. Okay, so the phases of the moon were all calculated. Okay, there is one more invention to do with religion as a result of the religion that was invented, and that's something that you need when you need to wake up at night to do night prayers, for example. Any ideas? When you're doing the night prayers are quite late, especially in Ramadan. This invention was made in Ramadan where there are night prayers, late night prayers. What do you need to do to stay awake? What do you do? What do you drink? Coffee. Coffee. So, coffee is actually a Muslim drink. Did you know that in the 9th century, Khalid, an Ethiopian shepherd, noticed his goats had more energy after eating a special berry? He boiled them, resulting in coffee. This then spread to Yemen, Turkey, Italy in 1645, and England in 1650. And did you know that the Arabic name Gawa, now I know there's some Urdu-speaking people here, so I'm pointing to you because I know you speak Urdu. We say Gawa as well, don't we? Yes? So Gawa is actually an Arabic name. That then changed to Gawe in Turkish, then to cafe in Italy, and then eventually became coffee in England. And some more facts discovered in the 1400s in Yemen. Mocha, did you know, is a region in Yemen. And Java, you see that on the coffee machines, don't you, is an island in Indonesia. Seen as a bad drink in the 1500s due to its association with Islam. The first coffee house opened in Istanbul in 1554. So basically, you know, Costa Coffee and all of those, Starbucks, they're all mimics really of the first coffee houses that Muslims opened. Muslims used it to stay awake during night prayers. And European coffee houses borrowed many Islamic ideas. And we're looking at, you know, I can think of Starbucks and things like that. Okay, there were more drinks, did you know, that were brought from Islamic countries into England. And this is the East India Company. It was founded at the end of the 16th century. Its royal charter, granted by Queen Elizabeth I in 1600, gave it exclusive rights to trade to India and the Far East. Now, India in those days was ruled by the Mughal Empire, and that was all Islamic. And there were so many things, actually, that were exchanged with Britain over at the depot, which was actually, the shipyard was in Deptford in 1609. And this is actually another painting painted by Robert Home and displayed in the National Army Museum. So this actually was a very, very important company. I want to be talking about other companies soon as well. Right, we have completed prayer. There is now a pillar called charity. Money is very, very important in Islam and giving money to the poor and things. But also there's something else that got invented due to the fact that in Islam it said that when you lend people money, you have to have 2 witnesses and you should write it down. Does anybody know what might have got invented as a result of that? Write something down? Money? Yes, checkbooks. I've got my Halifax checkbook here. There's your clue. There's loads of clues in this picture. So did you know that a cheque was actually invented by a Muslim? They were traders. They were trading in so many lands, and they sometimes owed people money. So they would give them the stuff, not take the money off them yet, and they would have to write things down. So here is a very old cheque. The modern cheque comes from the Arabic word suck, a written vow to pay for goods when they were delivered to avoid money having to be transported across dangerous terrain. In the 9th century, a Muslim businessman could cash a cheque in China drawn on his bank in Baghdad. That is actually from the book which is over on the table, Muslim Heritage in Our World, 2nd edition, Professor Slim T.S.O. Hassani.
Trade was a core part of the Muslim tradition and naturally led to innovation also. The modern cheque comes from the Arabic sak, a written vow to pay for goods when they were delivered to avoid money having to be transported across dangerous terrain. Did you know in the 9th century a Muslim businessman could cash a cheque in China drawn on his bank in Baghdad?
Okay, so in the Quran, did you know that it was also mentioned that the world is round, whereas previously it was thought that the world was flat. So that actually led on then to lots and lots of other inventions. So I've got another short video here. There were 5 scientists from the Middle East so far in what we've talked from the Quran. The first map was drawn by Al-Idrisi. He was a very famous Muslim geographer. And this is actually a picture of the very first map, world navigation map. It was with this theory that new maps were constructed, and it was these maps that were then used by future explorers. So here is what the Muslim geographers did. They produced books on geography of Africa, Asia, India, China, and the Indies during the 8th to the 15th century. The first geographical encyclopedias, almanacs, and road maps. Ibn Battullah's 14th century masterpieces provide detailed views of the geography of the ancient world, and exceeded output by Europeans regarding the geography of these regions right well into the 18th century.
Modern technology uses a system of satellites and other receiving devices to compute positions on the Earth. But back in history, maps were made from travellers' and pilgrims' accounts, sometimes on clay tablets. 7th century Muslims soon began to leave their homes for trade and for religious reasons, to perform pilgrimage and explore the world that they lived in. They walked routes, sometimes simply gathering knowledge about new places, and when they returned they gave account of the ways they had trodden and the people and sights they had encountered. First, this was by word of mouth, but with the introduction of paper in Baghdad in the 8th century, the first maps and travel guides could be produced. This desire to explore and to document the surroundings paved the way for the greatest world map of that era, produced by famous 12th century Andalusian cartographer Al-Idrisi. His world map was regarded as the most elaborate and complete description of the world ever made, and was used extensively by travellers for several centuries, contained detailed descriptions of the Christian North, as well as the Islamic world, Africa and the Far East.
And then because they started sailing around the world, they also had to look up navigation mechanisms. We've already looked at the compass. They already had invented the compass, and it's from that theory that the Qibla came out. So Muslim geographers and navigators were the first to use magnetic needles in navigation. They They invented the compass. European navigators relied on Muslim pilots and their instruments when exploring unknown territories. The Chinese improved their navigation after interacting with the Muslim traders during the 18th century. And did you know then that later on many European voyages and discoveries were possible because of these navigation systems? So it was the maps and the instruments later on that were used. Okay, and now we are going to look at the next lot of inventions.
The ancient Greeks thought our eyes emitted rays like a laser, which enabled us to see. The first person to realize that light enters the eye rather than leaving it was 10th century Muslim mathematician, astronomer and physicist Ibn al-Haytham. He invented the first pinhole camera after noticing the way light came through a hole in window shutters.
Okay, you know the word camera? Did you know the word camera is gamra? Okay, is anybody here who speaks Urdu? Yes? You're laughing over there. Gamra means room. Okay? And gamra is where you get the word camera from, which is really, really amazing, isn't it? A lot of big shocked eyes there. So Al-Haytham, again, he invented lots and lots of things. So this man invented so many things, and he was an Iraqi mathematician, physicist and astronomer, born in 965 AD. He influenced development of optics. He observed how light enters through a hole, discovering a smaller hole yields a better picture. He invented the first camera in the 10th century, named from the Arabic word gamra. And he proved that light travels in straight lines, and we see it because light reflects off objects into our eyes, whereas previously Greeks believed our eyes emit rays. What else do you think might have got invented as a result of the camera? So he looked at the mechanism of light going in and then changing and things like that. What else might he looked at as well? What is similar to a camera? Eyes? Yes? Our eye structure is similar. Okay, so did you know that he was the first person to study the eye, because the mechanism was very similar to the camera, and he actually drew the first picture of an eye. And this is actually crucial within medicine, because later on when I come to the medicine part, the first operation that was done was an eye operation, because they already had the structure in which to do the operation with. So he determined everything Newton advanced regarding optics centuries prior. He was regarded as the founder of optics. His works were utilized widely by European scholars. Roger Bacon again comes up here, we talked about him earlier. Roger Bacon's work on optics in the 13th century was influenced by the Book of Optics, 1021 by Al-Haytham or Al-Haytham. And he was the most quoted physicist of the 16th and 17th centuries. So this is actually a manuscript showing the first attempted description of the structure of the eye, and that is actually documented in the 1001 Inventions books. Okay? What else might have been invented because of knowing about the structure of eyes and cameras? Anything else?
Spectacles.
Yes, well done. Spectacles, optometry. Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain invented eyeglasses during the 9th century and were manufactured and sold throughout Spain for over 2 centuries. This is actually a very, very old pair of glasses from those days in the museum. Roger Bacon frequently referred to the research of Al-Haytham in 1039 in his books. And that's why I've got a pair of glasses there on that table. These are your clues, prompts, so that you can answer the questions. And this was actually, the glasses were kept in a pouch because the glass in the olden days wasn't strengthened and very quickly it would crumble. It was very, very thin. Remember, it's made out of sand, isn't it, originally? Later on with technology, glass became stronger, so it's put inside pouches. So while we're on the subject of glass, crystal as well. The study of how light travels and is refracted resulted in crystal. And the crystal was actually first used to make perfume bottles for trading. That was one of the things that the Muslims traded a lot, was actually perfume. And crystal is actually rife out there. And from the crystal, they had the coffee, but they didn't have the coffee glasses. So coffee glasses were then made. Even now, when you go to an Islamic country, I don't know if anybody here has been to Turkey or Egypt, they're everywhere, aren't they, those glasses? And I have got some here. We've got actually a coffee decanter here, that's from Egypt. And I have got the glass to go with it, okay? And we've got another one here as well. Okay, small one. And this is also a coffee decanter from Turkey. And why are they blue? Who remembers why they're blue? You can remember, I mentioned about blue earlier, didn't I? Anyone?
The stone, the turquoise stone.
Good, the turquoise stone was really, really rife out there, and that's what was used the most. Blue stone was then crushed up and put inside. And we've also got perfume bottles here. There's a perfume bottle from an Islamic country, again blue, and this one is actually from Tunisia. So there's a beautiful perfume bottle there. Perfume we will come to later, okay, when we start getting into the science of things. Okay, what else might have been invented because of glass? Any ideas? Conservatories? Okay, now the Arabs, they had beautiful gardens, okay, but it was too hot really to go outside into the gardens, and they'd like to sip their coffee from their ground houses, and they would build conservatories made out of glass. They had the glass already because of the sand, and they would sit in their lovely conservatories and they would look out into their beautiful garden and have their coffee at the same time. So conservatories were invented by Muslims, and they were originally called summer houses. What else might have been invented because of the glass? Anything else? There is one thing else. Girls will know this. Mirror, good, well done, mirrors. This is actually the very first mirror. You can't really see in there very well. It's not properly shiny yet. But did you know that the mirrors, glass mirrors, used in Islamic Spain in the 11th century? The Venetians learned of the art of fine glass production from Syrian artisans during the 9th and 10th centuries.
It is often thought that glass mirrors were first produced in Venice in the year 1291. This is not true. Glass mirrors were actually in use in Islamic Spain as early as the 11th century. The Venetians learned the art of fine glass production from Syrian artisans during the 9th and 10th centuries.
And then from the glass, this one will really interest the medics, all the chemistry equipment, test tubes, conical flasks, everything was made out of that glass. Muslim chemists Al-Razi, Al-Jabr, Al-Biruni and Al-Kindi performed experiments in chemistry 700 years prior to Boyle. They had all the laboratory equipment. Durant writes that Muslims introduced experimental methods to this science. Humboldt regards the Muslims as the founders of chemistry. And all of this, I was talking about earlier, is as a result of the science that was in the Quran. It led people to go out and investigate. So, for example, the whole evaporation cycle of water is in the Quran. And in Muslim lands, water was very scarce. So they were fascinated by this. It tells you everything in the Quran, that the water heats up and it rises, and then it forms stacks of clouds, then it goes to a dry land, and then the rain comes down. So what they did was, the Arabs were fascinated with water, so they investigated into evaporation. And to see, is it really that, what it says in the Quran? And it was. The concept of finite nature of matter first introduced by Persia's Muslim scholar Al-Biruni in 1050 AD, and Lavoisier referred to their books frequently and later introduced these principles to Europe in the 18th century. and discovered although matter may change its form, its mass remains the same. So that is absolutely amazing. So it started off with water, and then the next thing happened was distillation of other chemicals. What other chemicals were rife in the Middle Eastern lands? Apart from not having any water, they've got lots of what? Oil, yes? So steam distillation then carried on to oil as well. So Muslim chemists produced medicinal grade alcohol through distillation in the 10th centuries. Alcohol was used as a solvent. Muslim physicians and surgeons were applying purified alcohol to wounds as an antiseptic agent. They were the first plasters. And Muslim chemists produced kerosene as a distillate from petroleum products over 1,000 years prior to gas. Now obviously the oil was there, and they experimented with the oil, and they found at different boiling points you get different liquids. So it started off with water, then they started experimenting with oils was next, and then we look at other things. Chemistry. Jabir ibn Hayyan pioneered basic processes, equipment and chemical experiments that chemists use today, known for separating liquids by differences in boiling points, distillation, liquefaction, filtration, evaporation, purification, crystallization, and oxidization. That's just bringing me memories of my science degree. And they discovered sulfuric and nitric acid as well. And I said I would mention perfume later. Perfume then came through all this distillation process. Jabir ibn Hayyan was born in 722 AD, and Al-Kindi, we will talk about later as well, in 801 AD, were two of the most significant early Islamic chemists noted for their contribution in the development of perfume. They created the alembic, still used to create perfumes, and rose water. And those perfumes, again, when you go into Middle Eastern lands or lands where Islam first came, you always get ether. Ether is very, very strong perfume, and very, very original perfume is ether, without all the chemicals added in and things. So there's a bottle there if you want to come and have a sniff later on. And then we've got all the chemicals. They're all being made abundantly. Started off with the conical flasks and test tubes. Now we end up with the scientists. And the very first doctor, do any of you medics know who the very first doctor was? No? They're very quiet here. Do you know Louise? No? Okay. Islamic Spain, Arab Muslim, he was a great physician and surgeon, Abu al-Qasim or al-Zahrawi. He was the first doctor. He was the father of modern surgery. And basically, all of this is documented in books, Journal of Surgery, Volume 77. And he was known as Al-Bukassis in the West. He wrote a 30-volume book on medicine in the 900s, used as the main medical textbook in Europe for centuries. He learned how to treat and prevent diseases by eating healthy diet. Now again, if you look at healthy diets, that's only really right, I'd say, in the last 10 years. When I was a young girl, there was no such thing as healthy diets. We ate whatever. But healthy diets is all out, really, really in thing. He documented the pathology of hydrocephalus, water on the brain, and other congenital diseases. And the first operation that was done was actually a cataract operation. There was a reason for that, because the Muslims had already knew the structure of the eye. And that was actually carried out in the first hospital that was made by Muslims. So all of that we'll cover in a minute. Before this operation, did you know that leeches were used in the rest of the world to remove parts of the body? And al-Zahrawi performed also the first cesarean. Now, I'll tell you why that came about was the whole structure of the fetus is in the Quran, right from conception to, you know, all the different areas of it growing, the stages, is all in the Quran. So basically, all the doctors already knew about the structure and everything and what to do. So it's quite amazing. So have you ever wondered why a lot of doctors are Muslim? One, it's genetic. It must be, because it's carried on down the years. And two, we have got huge role models to look up to. And especially nowadays, with all the Islamophobia out there, Muslims are looking for great role models. And, you know, a lot of Muslims would like to be like the role models of the olden days. So this is why you will always get Muslim doctors. Okay, so obviously to do the operation, he needs surgical instruments. So Al-Zahrawi, he actually refined the science of surgery. He developed cauterization. He discovered diseases can be hereditary. Now, did you know that that is quite amazing, because there was no microscopes in those days to look at chromosomes or DNA patterns and things. So he worked out diseases can be hereditary. He invented 200 surgical instruments: scalpels, forceps used today in childbirth, needles, precision scissors. It started off with objects that he actually needed first for the operations he was doing, and then later on more. He realized that catgut can be used as a capsule to allow medication to be ingested and used for stitching organs, dissolving naturally. He ligated arteries with fine sutures 500 years prior to Pear. He developed the hollow needle method to extract cataracts from eyes, which is actually still used today. And he used cotton and wax to plug bleeding wounds, which is absolutely amazing. And this is actually the original manuscript of Al-Tasrif, written by Al-Zahrawi, depicting surgical instruments used for operations, which were used by Europeans as a reference guide for 500 years after. Details of his works were made available to Europeans through Latin translations. And anesthetics, when you do... Sorry?
Can you go back to the previous line?
If I can, yes, I will. Yeah.
How did you get this information? This copy of a book, isn't it?
This is actually in the Science Museum.
Oh, this particular book?
Yes, this is in the Science
This is
Museum.
in Arabic, isn't it?
Yes, it's in Arabic, yes. A lot of the pictures, if you looked at the eye
I'm trying to
diagram,
read the Arabic.
you're trying to read Arabic. I'll send you the slide afterwards, okay? If you look at the eye picture, there's Arabic on there as well.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yes. Now, when you do operations, so this is really interesting. It was wave after wave after wave. So operations, you can't do operation without surgical instruments. Surgical instruments were invented. And then when the operations are happening, you need anesthetics, don't you? How can you do an operation while the person is all in pain? So this is how so much then happened. So this, again, this is Arabic writing again. Again, you can actually read it, can't you? Anesthetics. So 600 years prior to Long, Al-Zahrawi, Ibn Zuhr, and other Muslim surgeons performed hundreds of surgeries under inhalation anesthesia with use of narcotic soap sponges placed over the face. Muslim physicians introduced the anesthetic value of opium derivatives during the Middle Ages. Paracelsus was a Greek student of Ibn Sina's works, from which he derived this idea. Ibn Sina is also a very important figure in Islam, which we will put on a video in a minute. Modern anesthesia was discovered and perfected by Muslim anaesthetists 900 years before Davy and Wells. They utilized oral and inhalant anesthetics. Surgeons in Islamic Spain utilized special methods for maintaining antisepsis prior to and during surgery. They also originated specific protocols for maintaining hygiene during the post-operative period. Their success rate was so high that dignitaries throughout Europe came to Cordoba, Spain, to be treated. It's absolutely amazing. And this is a very important doctor. He is Muhammad Zakaria Razi. He is the father of pediatrics. And what he did was he worked out that children medicine is different to adult medicine. He was the father of pediatrics, psychology, and psychotherapy. He studied body fluids to distinguish between different diseases, smallpox and measles. He studied eye conditions. Muslim physicians used specific substances to destroy microbes and applied sulfur topically to kill the scabies mite. Razi used mercurial compounds as topical antiseptics. He also wrote the very first book on pediatrics, and he discovered that temperature was a response to illness rather than an illness. In the 10th century, Razi wrote an in-depth treatise on the venous system, accurately describing the function of the veins and their valves. Ibn al-Nafs and Ibn al-Quf, 13th century, provided full documentation that the blood circulates and correctly described the physiology of the heart and the function of its valves 300 years before Harvey. William Harvey was a graduate of Italy's Padua University at a time when the majority of its curriculum was based upon Ibn Sina's and Razi's textbooks. And here is another famous psychologist. Psychology, if you think about it, is a very latest science, isn't it? You just have to go back to as old as I am. And psychology wasn't even there in half of the universities. So here is a little bit about, he was a psychologist as well, but this is the very first full psychologist. Okay, don't you find that absolutely fascinating? That bit about OCD, I'm really interested in as a special needs coordinator, but what he had written about OCD is actually the same as the term that's used nowadays. Absolutely amazing. And mental health is a topic of nowadays, isn't it, really? I mean, you just have to go back to 15 years ago. Mental health wasn't even hardly even recognised, really, in the European lands. But this was already recognised by him. Okay, injections was also invented by Muslims. So we have got a short video here on the concept of vaccinations in the Muslim world.
The concept of vaccinations were devised in the Muslim world and brought to Europe from Turkey by the wife of the English ambassador to Istanbul in 1724. Children in Turkey were vaccinated with cowpox to fight the deadly smallpox at least 50 years before the West discovered it.
Actually, that will make you happy, won't it? So we've mentioned Turkey quite a few times now. And did you know that Turkey are very, very proud of this? And they actually did have a stamp out a couple of years ago which showed this. So vaccination, children in Turkey were vaccinated with cowpox to prevent smallpox, establishing the technique of inoculation. 50 years later, in 1724, the wife of the English ambassador to Turkey introduced this practice to Europe. And this is actually a real picture of that stamp.
If I know it's not only valid for children and women, it also valid for animals.
Yes, yes, that's right, yes, yes. Did you know that Islam surgeons were the first pathologists? They understood and described the nature of diseases. Ibn Duhur correctly described the nature of pleurisy, TB and pericarditis. Ibn al-Kuf and Ibn al-Nafs gave perfect descriptions of the diseases of circulation. Other Muslim surgeons gave the first accurate descriptions of certain malignancies, including cancer of the stomach, bowel, and esophagus. These surgeons were the originators of pathology and way before Giovanni Morgagni. And we've got all the operations going on. Where's the hospitals? Hospitals then came later. The first hospital was opened in Damascus in 707 by Caliph Abdul Malik, and the first public hospital opened in Baghdad during the Abbasid Caliphate of Harun al-Rashidi in the 8th century. We mentioned him, he was the one who made the big House of Wisdom. Islamic hospitals maintained special wards for the insane. Why do you think they did that? Because they had all the knowledge of mental illness from the scientists, the previous psychologists that were around. They treated them really kindly and presumed that their mental health was real at a time when the insane were burnt alive in Europe as witches and sorcerers. That's what was going on at the time here. A curative approach was taken for mental illness and for the first time in history. The mentally ill were treated with supportive care, drugs and psychotherapy. Islamic cities maintained an insane asylum where patients were treated at no charge. So great respect was actually given to those patients, and the Islamic system for treatment of the insane excelled in comparison to Europe. So now let's look at medicines. Okay? Did you know that the word drug is an Arabic word? Are there any Arabs here? The word drug, yes? Somebody, yes, it is, isn't it? Drug means medicine, doesn't it? So here is a little bit about how Islamic medicine changed the world.
The world of medicine and health, as you know it, would be completely different had it not been for the innovation and knowledge of the Islamic world. Armed with the Quran, which made numerous mentions of healing, and knowing that God said He has created a cure for every illness, Muslims excelled in discovering new realms of medical science. At a time where Baghdad alone had some 80 hospitals, some of the greatest legacies of the Muslim world to this day are in the medical field.
So if we've got the medicines, we've got to have the pharmacies, yes? So Muslim chemists, pharmacists and physicians grew during the 9th to the 12th century. Originated the science of pharmacology. We've got a reference there, Philip Heaty, scholar of Arab history. Muslims, they wrote the first modern pharmacopoeias. They produced drugs and crude herbal extracts. Ibn Baythar published 1,400 drugs later circulated in Europe. Modern medicine is entirely an Islamic development. Reference Harvard's George Sultan. And Johann Weger was among thousands of European physicians during the 15th to the 17th centuries who were taught the medicine of Al-Razi and Ibn Sina. And did you know that Prophet Muhammad himself, he showed us so many cures. He showed us black seed. He said that that black seed is a cure for all illnesses except death. So the Muslims, they started getting the black seeds and doing experiments on them. Yeah? Dates, he said dates are good for you. So people started experimenting with dates, healthy eating, that kind of stuff. Yeah? The Prophet himself ate fruit and vegetables. He was a semi-vegetarian. People then started to eat fruit and vegetables, started looking into things. But this was all because of that. Bukhari is a collection of prophetic traditions which refer to a collection of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon his medicine. Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, Al-Kindi, Ibn Rashid, Al-Zahrawi, Ibn Dohr, Ibn Baytar, Ibn Al-Jazar, Ibn Julijul, Ibn Al-Quth, I've gone forever, Ibn Al-Nas, Al-Biruni, Ibn Sahel, and hundreds of other Muslim physicians mastered the science of drug therapy from the treatment of specific symptoms and diseases. This concept was entirely their invention. The word drug, I already told you, is derived from Arabic. Their use of practical experience and careful observation was extensive. Muslim physicians were the first to criticize ancient medieval theories and practices. Al-Razi devoted an entire book as a critique of Galen's anatomy. The works of Paracelsus are insignificant compared to the vast volumes of medical writings and original findings accomplished by the medical giants of Islam. So there are so many scientists. I could be here forever talking about all the doctors and the scientists. So this video highlights the top 5 medical scientists and doctors.
We live in a period of great change, of discovery and technological innovation. All areas of science are experiencing this progress, including healthcare and medicine, which have taken huge leaps forward in recent history. This quantum surge in medical knowledge and ingenuity is similar in importance to that which occurred in the Arab and Islamic world over 1,000 years ago. It was a storm of knowledge and enlightenment that still echoes in the halls of hospitals and clinics today. From the first accurate descriptions of the circulatory system to vaccination, surgery, and establishing the first real hospitals, our ancestors built the groundwork of modern medicine. The scientists of that age were often prominent in a number of subject areas. Abu Bakr al-Razi, known more popularly as al-Razi, was a shining example of this. He lived around the turn of the 9th and 10th century AD and made fundamental and lasting contributions to the field of medicine, chemistry, music, and philosophy, which is documented in over 200 books and articles, and made many discoveries in medicine through his own observations and experiments. Among his many medical achievements was to differentiate between smallpox and measles, which used to be confused before then, and identify fever as being the body's natural defense system, and not a disease in itself. Possibly his most famous work is the extensive medical encyclopedia in 9 volumes called Al-Hawi. When it was translated into Latin more than 300 years after his death, it had a big influence on the course of medicine in Europe. Of equal, if not of greater influence in Western Europe, was the comprehensive work of Ibn Sina, the Canon of Medicine, which was translated into Latin and used as a textbook in several universities until the middle of the 17th century. It is best known for its scientific approach to medicine, based on experimentation and quantification, describing known contagious diseases and sexually transmitted diseases, and introducing quarantine to limit the spread of infectious diseases, in addition to predicting the existence of microorganisms. In surgery, other physicians left their legacy, like Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, who identified 200 surgical instruments, many of which are still used today. He also introduced plaster for setting broken bones and catgut for stitching wounds, a practice still used today. Ammar ibn Ali al-Mawsili is also notable for inventing the injection syringe and hypodermic needle for the extraction of cataracts in the first successful cataract surgery, while Ibn Nafis was the first to accurately describe the blood-breathing and circulatory system in a manner comparable to modern medicine. And those were brilliant men of science that still shine bright in the stars of science galaxy.
So that's my medical stuff done, which I did especially for the medical students that are here today. So let's move on to other inventions. Does anybody know any other inventions that Muslims did? We can quickly go through some more.
Algebra.
Yes, we're going to come to a whole section on maths in a minute. I thought we'll move a little bit away from the science for a break now, just in case some of you are not into science. Anything else? Right, let's go through a few. So tents, okay? We know Bedouin tents, it's from tents that in the desert that the tents came here, and then marquees came much later. And also, don't forget that in Islamic countries, it is very, very hot, isn't it? So fan systems. So this is actually, first of all, there were so many rotary movements that came into play. Started off with fan and then later on windmills. So windmills were devised and constructed to draw up water. Remember what I said, that water was scarce and water needed to be drawn up from under the ground. Draw up water from streams to irrigate vegetation and grind corn. The first windmill was created in 634 AD for a Persian caliph, 500 years before the first ones were introduced in Europe. This is actually a very early drawing of the Persian horizontal windmill. And it's from this concept that fans were also introduced. And remember, there's no wind in Arabia either. It's very still kind of atmosphere.
Most historians believe it was the Crusaders who introduced windmills to Europe in the 12th century. No, in fact, a Persian had come to the second Caliph Umar, who reigned for 10 years from 634, and claimed he could build a mill operated by wind, so the Caliph ordered him to have one built. After this, wind power became widely used to run millstones for grinding corn and also to draw up water for irrigation. In the vast deserts of Arabia, when the seasonal streams ran dry, the only source of power was the wind, which blew steadily from one direction for months. Mills had 6 or 12 sails covered in fabric or palm leaves. It was to be 500 years before the first windmill was seen in Europe.
And then this is very interesting. This is Abbas ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain. Now he came up earlier, didn't he? He's the one who invented, was it the glasses he invented, wasn't it? So he comes up again. He actually was a poet, an astronomer and engineer. Remember what I said? They studied so many different subjects, so they ended up specializing in so many subjects. He was the first person to attempt to fly. He invented, constructed and tested a flying machine in 852 AD. And that picture really makes me laugh because he's actually wearing his Islamic clothes in there as well. And he jumped from the Grand Mosque minaret in Cordoba, or Cordoba if you want to say in Arabic, and suffered minor injuries. He retried in 875 AD at the age of 70. He wasn't going to give up. Using a machine made of silk and eagle's feathers, he managed to stay in the air for 10 minutes. He's honoured by having a crater on the moon, and Baghdad airport is named after him. And Roger Bacon learned of flying machines. That Roger Bacon is everywhere, isn't he, wherever the scientists are. Roger Bacon learned of flying machines from Arabic references to Ibn Firnas's machine. The latter's invention antedates Bacon by 500 years and Da Vinci by 700 years. Okay, so he was the first to test the first flying apparatus.
1,000 years before the Wright brothers, a Muslim poet, astronomer, musician and engineer named Abbas ibn Firnas made several attempts to construct a flying machine. In 852, he jumped from the minaret of the Grand Mosque in Cordoba using a loose cloak stiffened with wooden struts. He had hoped to glide like a bird. He didn't. But the cloak slowed his fall, creating the first parachute and leaving him with only minor injuries. In 875, aged 70, having perfected a machine of silk and eagle's feathers, he tried again, jumping from a mountain. He flew to a significant height and stayed aloft for 10 minutes, flew a considerable distance, but crashed on landing, concluding correctly that it was because he had not given his device a tail, so it would stall on landing. Many historians declare Ibn Firnas's invention illustrates how he succeeded in materializing the idea of flight, and every airplane that takes off today has a connection with the flying machine he once constructed. Baghdad International Airport and a crater on the moon are named after him today, as is an airline based in the UK.
Gunpowder, fireworks if you like. Research by Raynuad and Fave shows gunpowder was initially formulated by Muslim chemists. Muslims developed the first firearms. Muslim armies used grenades in their defense of Algericus against the Franks in the 14th century. Jean Mathis indicates Muslim rulers had rifles, sulfur bombs, pistols decades before Europe. First mention of a cannon was in an Arabic text in 1300 AD, and Roger Bacon learnt the formula for gunpowder from Latin translations of Arabic books. Now the merchants, the Islamic merchants, were going from country to country selling their goods, and they're the ones who made the first roads, and then obviously motorways came from roads. So the Silk Road, 206 BC to AD 220, the Silk Road was a trade route linking the east to west along with traders could travel to sell their wares. It is called the Silk Route because it was first used to carry Chinese silk during the time of the Chinese Han Dynasty. And from there, we will also talk about materials. Did you know that the most expensive materials came from the Arabic district? That was some of the things that the merchants were selling to Britain. This is actually a very interesting European painting. It's actually the edge of Mother Mary's gown, Jesus' mother's gown. And as you can see, there's Arabic writing on the edging. So during the Middle Ages, the best quality products all came from the Muslim world. And when European artists would paint images of very important people, like Mary, they would put fake Arabic letters on their clothes as a sign of wealth and refinement. And there is some Arab fashion that came to Britain. Did you know that in the days of Elizabeth I of England, she was one of the earliest British monarchs to establish relations, alliances and trade with Muslim majority countries? The reason is the Crusades had happened and she wanted to rebuild the connections with Muslims. And did you know that this man, Abdul Uhayd bin Masood, he was actually a Moorish ambassador to the Queen in 1600. And did you know that the clothes he wore were really, really rich? And what happened was, turbans started becoming rife in England. People wanted to dress up really, really rich. Turbans were worn in Renaissance England, while friendly relations were formed between England and the Islamic civilizations of the Middle East in the early 16th century. Persian and Turkish style fashions were sometimes worn by the higher classes as a form of fancy dress, an important dress. And also, what Queen Elizabeth also did was, she's the one who first opened up the East India Dock Company, but also she is one of the first ones to amalgamate the Venice Company and the Turkey Company to form the Levant Company. This was an English chartered company formed in 1592, and it was formed with the purpose of regulating English trade with Turkey and the Levant. This person is actually an English person, and he was hired to look like an Islamic person to increase trade with Islamic countries. So this is a portrait. He is in a Turkish costume. He's a London merchant, Francis Levat, and he is the chief representative of the Levant company, and they've put him in Arab clothes in order to do business. So people will think he's Arab and they will do business with this company. Very clever queen. Now, all of this Levant company brought in silk and all these really, really posh clothes from the Arabic lands, spices, new spices were introduced, perfumes, gold, that kind of stuff. And piracy also increased in the whole of Europe, because at these ports where all these things were being exchanged, piracy increased. Now this is a really interesting pirate. 1607, Captain John Ward of Kent, English pirate, based in Morocco, converted to Islam and became Yusuf Wiz. Who knows who this really is? Have a look at his name. Any ideas? I think you know, don't you? Come on, what about Captain, what's that Caribbean thingy, what's it called again? Captain Jack Sparrow, that is. Captain Jack Sparrow was actually Muslim, and there he is. This is not, I'm not lying, you can look him up. So, the number of English pirates increased as ships were being brought in trade, and Captain John Ward was obsessed with little birds during his time in Tunisia, where he fled. So much that the locals started calling him Jack Asfor, being Arabic for sparrow. This is where the name Captain Jack Sparrow comes from. And when he became Muslim, he was not allowed back in the country, and Tunisia had to take him in. Morocco wouldn't take him in because the ambassador to the Queen was from Morocco. So it's quite sad what happened to him, but he was actually Muslim, and he brought a lot of Islamic goods into Britain through all his piracy. Other things linked with clothes, quilting. Did you know that quilting is actually Islamic? Sewing two pieces of cloth together with a layer in between was brought back to Europe by the Crusaders. Muslim armies did not wear armour, but quilted shirts filled with straw. Quilting became popular in colder regions of Europe, like Britain. Okay, what about Shakespeare's plays? Who has heard of 1001 Arabian Nights? Who's heard of Arabian Nights? How on earth did that get to Britain? It came from all the trading that was going on in the ports. And when 1001 Nights came, Arabian Nights, to Britain, it was translated into English. And do you know that some of those stories were taken then by William Shakespeare, and one classic one is Layla Majnun. Who's heard of Layla Majnun? Yes? Yes, Layla Majnun. Layla Majnun became what? Do you know? That's it, Romeo and Juliet. Exact story, okay? Exact story. And the Muslim Wars had a noticeable influence on the works of George Peele. The Battle of Alcazar featured a Moorish character. These are all very famous English books. Didn't read the rest of that slide. And William Shakespeare, The Merchant of Venice, Titus, Andronicus, and Othello in 1603, they all featured a Moorish character. Moorish Othello has its title character. So all of these have got links with Islam. Now we're going to go on to maths. Who likes maths? Who doesn't like maths? I'm one of them. Okay, thanks to Muslims, we've got maths. This is the invention that I don't like, actually. So mathematics, Al-Kindi was huge when it comes to maths. Arabic numerals and the concept of zero, vital to the advancement of maths, was formulated by Muslim scholars and shared with medieval Europe. And did you know that the whole English number system we use is all originally from Arabic numbers? So if you look at these numbers, and you look at them this way, that looks like a 2, that looks like a 3, that looks like a 4. And 7, actually 9 is identical, and 0 was actually invented by Muslims. Remember, there were Roman numerals there before, in the Middle Ages. 852 AD, two Muslim mathematicians, Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Kindi, first to write a style of numerals becoming the standard in the world and later established in Europe by Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci. Al-Kindi discovered encryption, which we're going to look at in a minute, because did you know it's encryption that's used in all the modern day stuff? This is what I meant by the second golden age of Islam. Decoding number patterns and frequent analysis, helping to decipher codes of ancient civilizations. And Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Kindi, they formed theories still used today, algorithms. Who's used algorithm tables in the past? I did. That shows how old I am. And here is the major second golden age inventions that are linked with Al-Kindi's findings. Okay, what he did was he incorporated the maths with the science, and it said in there that he actually started measuring out dosages for medicines and things as well. So that's quite amazing. Right, algebra. I hate algebra. That was, I think somebody mentioned that earlier, that was actually invented by Muslims. So Al-Khwarizmi was born around 800 AD, and he is regarded as the father of algebra. He introduced the concept of using letters for unknown variables in equations in the 9th century. He solved complex equations, including quadratic and cubic equations. He used symbols to develop and perfect the binomial theorem. And algebra was named after his book Al-Jabr wa al-Muqabla. Al-Jabr actually means equation, so that is where that comes from.
Talking of famous mathematicians, you know those algorithms that are used by so many of our websites and technology today? Algorithms are central to how most of modern technology is programmed. You wouldn't have Facebook or YouTube without algorithms. In fact, you wouldn't even have the internet nor your smartphone. Well, you can thank Persian mathematician and astronomer Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, for that too. Algebra comes from the Arabic, and the title of his book, Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabbala.
So Al-Khwarizmi introduced algebra and equations. What part of maths is now left? something I talked about earlier when I showed you this. When I talked about mosque decorations. What is that? Geometry, good. So geometry was invented because the mosques had to be decorated in something different to images. So here is a very early geometrical pattern that was devised, and Tabit bin Qura was the first to discover algebra, and he discovered that it could be used to solve geometrical problems. Abu Wafa wrote a 10th century book utilizing algebra to advance geometry into an exact simplified science. He introduced negative numbers. Remember, they already had 0, so they looked under 0 as well. He introduced negative numbers 400 years prior to Cardano. Invented logarithms. Who's used logarithm tables in the past? I did. That was before we had all these Casio calculators. Invented logarithms and produced logarithmic tables in the 13th century. And the next advancement was geometry. The mosques were very, very bland, like I said, and this was the decoration that was introduced. And calculus, quadrants, decimals, and fractions were used by Al-Ghashi. He utilized decimals instead of fractions on a large scale. His book, Key to Arithmetic, written in the 15th century, was the stimulus for the systematic application of decimals to whole numbers and fractions. And Sterling imported the idea to Europe from Al-Ghashi's work. Now this man, I did mention I was going to bring back again. He is the one who was a very famous astronomer, and he looked into making an astrolabe for the direction of prayer. He's back again, because, believe it or not, astronomy is linked with maths as well. So this is what he did. Trigonometry remained a theoretical science amongst Greeks, underdeveloped by Al-Battani. Sine, cosine, and tangent were derived from Arabic terms, so all of those three are Arabic words: sine, cosine, and tangent. And because they've got all of that, they actually looked into the rotary motion of wheels as well, on how it works. This is a very early drawing of all the arcs and things. And because of that, all these things were then, all that knowledge was then put into anything that used around objects. So we've got pistons there, springs, we've got wheels there as well. We've got a seesaw, the middle rotary motion there as well. So we are now going to have a summary. Like I said at the beginning, I can't do everything. There's over 1,001 inventions. I've just picked the top ones. So we're going to have a quick summary, and then we will have questions.
Muslim history is overflowing with awe-inspiring creations in the realms of art, architecture, and literature, but it's also filled with many significant and world-changing inventions. Here are 10 of them, as reported by CNN. Number 10, surgery. Dr. Al-Zarawi literally wrote the book on surgery about 1,000 years ago. It was used throughout Europe for the next 500. He's also credited with inventing forceps and figuring out that cat guts make great dissolvable stitches. Number 9, coffee. The first pot was brewed in Yemen in the 9th century. In the early days, it helped citizens stay awake for their late-night devotions. The beverage soon began to make the rounds in the area and finally ended up in Europe in the 16th century. Number 8, flying machine. Long before Leonardo da Vinci started dreaming of flight, Abbas bin Farnas was actually trying it. He built his first flying machine in the 9th century, and for a little while it worked. A very little while.
He covered his body in a bird costume, guided himself into the harness, and told the crowd, "By guiding these wings up and down, I should ascend like the birds."
Number 7, university. The world's very first degree-granting university was founded in Fez, Morocco in 859. It was established by Fatima Al-Feri, a young princess. Nearly 1,200 years later, and it's still going strong. Number 6, algebra. Whether you want to thank him or blame him, all the credit goes to Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. He penned the treatise that defined a new algebraic order in the 9th century. Number 5, optics. Prior to the discoveries of Al-Haytham in the year 1000, it was widely believed that the eye itself emitted the light that makes sight possible. He set the record straight, proving that it takes in light that is bounced off other surfaces. Number 4, music. Okay, not all music, but many from the Middle East contributed greatly to its development. The lute and the rahana, which influenced the creation of the violin, were both introduced to Europe by Muslim musicians. Also, the scale we use today is said to come from the Arabic alphabet. Number 3, toothbrush. Thankfully, around the year 600, the Prophet Muhammad reportedly had the good sense to fashion one out of a twig. The tree it came from also had breath-freshening qualities. Number 2, the crank. The first known instance of converting rotary movement to a linear one occurred in the Middle East in the 12th century. Since then, the method has been used worldwide for lifting heavy objects, driving internal combustion engines, and creating bicycles. Number 1, hospitals. The earliest known versions of them began to pop up in Muslim world late in the 9th century. They had centers for teaching as well as patient wards.
Okay, did you know that while all the Golden Age was going on, it was the Dark Ages in Europe? And it was actually all the Golden Age in the Islamic world that lit up the world, including Europe. So basically, all good things come to an end, and the saddest bit really of my lecture today is what happens afterwards. So what's very, very sad is that in 1258 there was a big Islamic civilization invasion, and the Mongols from Asia attacked Islamic lands, and what they did was they destroyed that big house of wisdom from where all the knowledge and all the inventions were being exchanged at the borders of Europe. They burnt Baghdad and they killed thousands of people. They threw millions of books into the river, and did you know that people who have recorded history have said that the water actually turned black with the ink? It's very sad. The city never recovered its former glory, but the ideas they live on. Okay? So that brings me to the end, and we are now going to have questions. Have you got any questions?
Say some comments. You know, you mentioned the Dar Hikmah.
Yes,
the
yes.
House of Wisdom.
Oh, yes, very good.
Yeah, this is really turned later on actually during the Al-Mustansir, the Caliph Al-Mustansir.
Oh, yes.
The university is called, still now available, called Al-Mustansir
Is
University.
it still there now?
Yeah, it's still there
Oh,
now.
that's
Of course,
great.
they republish it, but
They
it's still the
republish it.
original one.
Yes.
It's still there, it's still university. It
Oh,
has all the
that's wonderful.
sections.
Have you been there?
My sister went to university.
Oh, that's
The
really
university, she
great.
graduated from mathematics.
Yes.
And by the way, Ashkin is Iraqi.
Yes, yes, he is, yes. Lot of Iraqis in there. Lots. Yeah. In fact, we went around the whole world, didn't we?
Yeah.
This is why I did this in Global Week for a reason. I explained this at the beginning, because this is actually to do with all the countries, isn't it, around the world. So.
Yeah, and to honor him, they built a big establishment during Saddam time of the military called Al-Kindi.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Yeah, I didn't know that
Yeah,
actually.
it's actually very close to our house in Mosul.
Oh,
Of
lovely.
course, it's been
Yeah.
neglected now. If you want.
Yes.
It's still available,
Yes.
but still neglected as
Yeah.
things went on.
Great. Well, I don't know about all of you, but I've learned loads in doing this, so there's a lot there, isn't there? Okay, then thank you all for coming, and I'll meet you outside and we can talk and mingle and have some tea and stuff. Thanks. And if you would like to have a little booklet before you leave, this is on the Quran and modern science that you can take with you, which I did cover a lot of scientific knowledge in the lecture at the beginning. Okay, so thank you all for coming, and do look around outside. We'll have a tea and coffee. We'll have coffee together, and we can all talk then. Okay.